In this episode of Motorsport Recently, we look back at the events in the Triple Crown of Motorsport so far, run down on the races in Detroit, review the new Project Cars 2 DLC, and preview the most important, most historic, and most exciting race of the year, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. This is Triple Crown Racing, let's get into it. 2 weeks ago, we were treated to the first of the Triple Crown events, Monaco, also the 6th round of the Formula 1 World Championship. I won't be covering this race for too long, as it was about as exciting as watching grass grow. Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel were close in the championship, having won 2 races each, but Hamilton had been more consistent and was leading the championship over Vettel. Interestingly enough, Australia's Daniel Ricciardo had clinched pole position, with Vettel starting second and Hamilton in third. Unfortunately, the action at the front of the field was pretty dull other than Ricciardo's engine problems. In the closing stages of the race, Vettel was right behind Ricciardo, but due to the wear on his front tyres, he couldn't overtake him, and that was basically the end of the race. It might actually have been interesting if somebody hadn't spoiled the race to me. Yes, I do record the races, I can't watch them live. Good news is, Ricciardo scored his second win of the season, and this has actually made a championship challenge not all that unreasonable. In other news, Max Verstappen overtook some people and went from the very back of the field to 9th place, which is pretty impressive. Also, F1 rookie prodigy and 2017 Formula 2 champion Charles Leclerc crashed into the back of Brendan Hartley because of a brake failure. The point standings after the race mean that Ricciardo moves up to 3rd in the championship, with Vettel 2nd and Lewis Hamilton still leading the championship. At the time of recording this, the Canadian Grand Prix hasn't happened yet. Let's hope for something a little more exciting. After the snooze fest of the Monaco Grand Prix, we were treated to the greatest spectacle in motorsport, the Indy 500. Almost right from the get-go, the race was already making headlines. Indycar veteran Danica Patrick had returned with Ed Carpenter Racing for her last ever race. Controversially, fan favourite James Hinchcliffe had gotten bumped from the race during qualifying along with Pippa Mann. Fans were delighted to see Ed Carpenter put his car on pole position alongside the Penske's of Simon Pagenaud and Will Power. Early on in the race, Ed Carpenter managed to pull out an early lead. Early on in the race, James Davison was having problems with his car and was running significantly slower than the rest of the drivers. Inevitably, this caused an accident with 2017 Indy 500 champion Takuma Sato. Dirty air was proving to be a massive issue, with many drivers struggling to overtake and many drivers crashing because of it. Ed Jones crashed because of dirty air, and so did fan favourite Danica Patrick, ending her Indy 500 and her racing career. Through all of this, Tony Kanaan managed to overtake Ed Carpenter, ending his dominant lead. It was looking like it was going to be an interesting battle between Carpenter and Kanaan, but then Kanaan picked up a puncture, effectively ending his Indy 500 challenge. Then Zach Veach went on fire. Then Bourdais became the 3rd driver to crash from dirty air, and then Elio Castroneves crashed because of dirty air. He was actually many people's pick to win the race. And then Sage Karam crashed. But somewhere in all of that, Power did some strategy stuff and managed to get himself to the front of the field. But then his strategy stuff failed because everyone kept crashing, and Oriol Sturvia, Stefan Wilson and Jack Harvey decided to try and undercut everyone by pitting under caution. And it worked, because when Tony Kanaan crashed, guess why, they managed to save fuel and get to the front of the field. It actually looked like they could win until their strategy didn't work anymore, and they came into the pits in the closing stages of the race. Myself and everyone else in Australia were delighted to see Will Power cruise home to win the race. Like always, the Indy 500 was awesome. The only thing I'm not sure I liked that much was how much the race was affected by dirty air. It was interesting, don't get me wrong, but the first 100 laps weren't exactly exciting. Still better than Monaco, though. The IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Circus went to the Belle Isle Street Circuit in Detroit, along with the Verizon Indycar series. IMSA only had the GTD class and the prototype class at this race because all the GTLM cars went off to Le Mans. Pipo Derani qualified the number 22 Tequila Patron car on pole alongside the number 6 Penske Acura. In GTD, Brian Sellers was on pole in the number 48 Paul Miller Racing Lamborghini with Madison Snow, his teammate. The race started and Eric Curran started pushing his way through the prototype field in the number 31 Whelen Engineering Cadillac. Almost as soon as the race started, Pipo Derani and Tequila Patron's chance of winning the race was gone when technical gremlins forced the number 22 car into the pits and out of contention. Meanwhile, the GTD cars were fighting hard. At the front of that field, Catherine Legge was battling the pole-sitting Lamborghini for the win of the race, in the 86 Acura. At this point in the season, nobody was entirely sure she would even be able to stay in the series, with talks of pulling the 86 Acura out of the championship other than the endurance rounds. Basically, at the front of the field it was the battle for the championship. The Lamborghini was leading the championship, followed by the Acura. The number 15 3GT Racing crashed, bringing out a full course caution. Most of the field came into the pits other than the Mustang sampling car. Number 48 lost out to both of the Shank Racing Acuras in the pits. The two Penskes, who had been running second and third, lost out to the Wheeling Engineering car in the pits. The Wheeling car, now driven by former Formula 1 driver Felipe Nasr, stayed in the lead of the race after the 5-car pit and despite being chased down by the Penskes when it hit traffic. Catherine Legge switched over with Mario Farnbacher, who brought the 86 Acura home to win the race, score an Acura 1-2 finish in the GTD class. After Le Mans, the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship heads to Watkins Glen for the third round of the North American Endurance Championship, the 6 Hours of the Glen. After the excitement of the Indy 500, the Verizon IndyCar Series joined IMSA in Detroit for a doubleheader weekend. For the first race, Marco Andretti was on pole position, which is interesting, but the race win wasn't to be, because Marco lost out to Scott Dixon in the pit lane. Graham Rahal crashed, as did Santino Ferrucci after being crashed into by Charlie Kimball. In the closing stages of the race, Ryan Hunter-Reay battled Dixon for the lead. Scott Dixon managed to hold on and come home to win race 1. In race 2, the pace car crashed, Alexander Rossi started from the pole, and when the race started, Ryan Hunter-Reay began charging up through the field, having started in 10th place. Bourdais had what is being described as a roller coaster day. First he got a puncture, then made his way back through the field, then his car broke. The race went on, it looked like a certain victory for Rossi, but then this happened. As a result, he lost the lead of the race and handed it to his Andretti Autosport teammate. Ryan Hunter-Reay cruised home to win race 2 at Belle Isle with Will Power in second. Will Power now leads the championship, followed by Scott Dixon and Alexander Rossi. On to Texas then. This week saw the release of Project Cars 2's new DLC, the Spirit of Le Mans pack. This new DLC includes the Porsche 919 Hybrid, Toyota TS050, Audi R18 Fuji and Le Mans Edition, Ferrari 512S, Ferrari 512M, Porsche 917 LH, Porsche 924 Carrera GTP, Porsche 961, as well as the vintage 1971 version of the Le Mans circuit. The release of this pack is obviously due to Le Mans happening very soon. I've bought the new Le Mans pack and I have to say, it's brilliant. The new LMP1 cars are absolutely awesome. They have a curse system which can be deployed with whatever button you've assigned curse to. If you thought the LMP1 cars that were already in the game were fast, you'll be absolutely blown away by these new ones. I've raced in a few online races with them and I couldn't stop driving them. They were the only things I actually wanted to drive. I've tested all the new LMP1 cars and in my opinion the Toyota is the best of the new cars. I can't speak for everyone however, and you'll have to try them all for yourself. The classic prototypes are great fun to drive, especially on the old Le Mans. They handle great and they are stupidly quick. On its own, the Porsche 917 can do around 212 miles an hour on the chicaneless Mulsanne Straight, but in the slipstream I managed to hit north of 230 miles an hour. I haven't driven the other two prototypes as much, but from what I have experienced with them, they are just as good as the Porsche. I found that the Porsche 924 GTP wasn't quite as fun to drive as the vintage prototypes. Mind you, I just finished driving the prototypes when I tested the 924. It felt kinda sluggish. Still fun to drive, but not something I really want to drive a lot. However, the Porsche 961 is fantastic. It's not unlike a GT3 car. It goes exactly where you want it to, and it was pretty fun to drive. I haven't had the chance to race it yet, but I'm sure it will be great fun when I do. If you want to see more Project Cars 2 content on this channel, let me know in the comments, as I am racing in a GT3 league in Aussie Sim Racing. We are now around a week away from the most important, most historic, and most exciting race of the year, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, first of the two Le Mans of the 2018-19 WEC Super Season. This year we have one of the most exciting and interesting grids to ever line up on the starting grid at the Circuit de la Sarthe. Perhaps this year, more than ever before, Formula 1 names on the grid are omnipresent. We have all the WEC regulars on the grid, as well as a few other notable entries. Let's take a look. Toyota are going to be prime contenders for this year's Le Mans, as well as the LMP1 category. All eyes are going to be on the number 8 Toyota, piloted by Sebastian Buemi, Kazuki Nakajima, and Fernando Alonso. If the number 8 car fails for whatever reason, the number 7 car will be second in line to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans, piloted by Kamui Kobayashi, Mike Conway, and Jose Maria Lopez. Toyota's closest competitor comes from Rebellion Racing, with the number 1 car piloted by Bruno Senna, Neil Yanni, and Andre Lotterer, and the number 3 car driven by Thomas Laurent, Matthias Besch, and Gustavo Menezes. Another notable entrant is the number 11 SMP car driven by Vitaly Petrov, Mikhail Aloshin, and none other than Jenson Button. Those are the notable entries in the LMP1 category. The number 8 car is most likely to win, but I'd love to see either SMP or Rebellion win the race. Like always, the competition in the LMP2 category will be fierce, and not unlike the LMP1 category, the grid is riddled with F1 presence. Let's take a look at some interesting ones. Fernando Alonso is not the only one competing for the Racing Triple Crown. Juan Pablo Montoya can win the Motorsport Triple Crown this year. He has previously won both the Monaco Grand Prix and the Indianapolis 500. Winning Le Mans this year will mean that Juan Pablo Montoya will be the first driver to win 3 of these prestigious events since Graham Hill. He will be fielding the number 32 United Autosports Ligier alongside Hugo de Sadalier and Will Owen. Jackie Chan DC Racing are returning to Le Mans this year after they almost won the race outright in 2017. They are coming to Circuit de la Sarthe with 4 cars, 2 Oricas and 2 Ligiers. Most of the names of the Jackie Chan Racing lineup I couldn't pronounce if my life depended on it. Instead of butchering them all, I thought I'd just leave the names on screen. There you go. WTF1 meme lovers rejoice. Earlier in the year, Pastor Maldonado himself joined the number 31 Dragon Speed lineup as a full-time entrant into the WEC, and soon he'll be participating for the first time at Le Mans. He'll be joined by Nathaniel Bertone and Roberto Gonzalez. Perhaps the prime contender for the LMP2 victory is the number 26 G-Drive car, driven by Jean-Eric Verne, Roman Rusinov, and Andrea Pizzitola, who won the 6 Hours of Spa and are currently leading both the European Le Mans Series Championship and the WEC. G-Drive are most likely to win this class, but I'd love to see Juan Pablo Montoya win it for United Autosports and upset all those Fernando Alonso fanboys. The GTE Pro category should be interesting as always. Basically, we have all the WEC regulars, as well as everyone from the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. Here are some notable entrants. Porsche and Ford have both brought 4 cars for their Le Mans campaign. Ford have their usual WEC contenders, as well as 2 extra cars, mainly piloted by IMSA regulars. The 2 cars will be piloted by Scott Dixon, Ryan Briscoe, Richard Westbrook, Sebastian Bourdais, Dirk Muller, and Joey Hand. Porsche have brought 2 extra cars, again piloted by their IMSA regulars. Their 2 extra cars will be driven by Nick Tandy, Patrick Pilet, Earl Bamber, Timo Bernhard, Romain Dumas, and Sven Muller. Corvette have brought their 2 cars over from the States for their Le Mans campaign. They will be hungry for victory after losing out to Aston Martin in the closing stages of the race last year. Their 2 cars will be driven by Jan Magnussen, Antonio Garcia, Mike Rockenfeller, Oliver Gavin, Tommy Milner, and Marcel Fassler. In the race, I believe it will be a fight between Porsche and Ford for the race win. I can't be sure which manufacturer will come out on top, but it should make the GTE Pro class very interesting. And now, the final class, GTE AM. A team that will definitely be competing for the win is the 98 Aston Martin Racing Team. Their car will be driven by WEC regulars Matthias Lauda, Pedro Lamy, and Paul Dallalana. Aston Martin's steepest competition may actually come from one of their own privateer teams. TS Sport took the fight to Aston Martin Racing with their own Aston Martin during the 6 Hours of Spa. Their car will be driven by Ewan Hankley, Sally Ulock, and Charlie Eastwood. The competition could be very close between these two Aston Martin teams. Aston Martin will face tough competition from the Porsche and Ferrari teams. Dempsey Proton and Clearwater Racing are most likely going to be taking the fight to the Astons. Dempsey Proton are going to Le Mans with 2 cars, but the most competitive will most likely be the 88 car, driven by Matt Campbell, Christian Reed and Julian Ondeler. Clearwater Racing have brought 1 Ferrari to Le Mans that will be driven by Weng Sun Mok, Matt Griffin and Kitasawa. I think that the number 98 car will win the race, but much like GTE Pro, GTM should be pretty interesting. So that's going to do it for this Le Mans preview and this episode of Motorsport Recently. Obviously I don't own all of the footage that's in this video, or really any of it, so I'll leave the links in the description to all the channels that I borrowed from. Anyways, also the full Le Mans entry list is in the description as well, so you can go have a look at that if you want to. I've been Triple Crown Racing, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, goodbye.